Hello, I wanted to give a general overview of some of the entrepreneurship research that I've been working on. And this overview is meant for a general audience. So I have in mind prospective PhD applicants, students in my classes, and so I'm going to try and avoid using too much jargon and just kind of explain things in more general terms. So overall, I've been working on the influence of the broader environment on entrepreneurship. So there's been a lot of talk recently, especially in Silicon Valley, about the business model and how you need to map out the value proposition, the customer segments you're talking about, the key activities and key partners. And so one way to think about the research that I've been working on is that I've been trying to look a bit at the broader environment and how that impacts the optimal type of business model and co-founding team. So this could include the institutions, universities, social norms, or it could also include the industry or the market stage, as well as things like social movements or stakeholders, and how these external environmental influences shape the search for a business model. And so in looking at this broader environment, I'm looking at things that range from the formal to the informal. So under the formal category, we're talking about things like policies. In the informal category, we're talking about things more like culture or social norms. And then kind of in between these two categories, I've also been looking at how the industry context shapes entrepreneurship. So these things obviously all have influences on one another as well. And so there's a complex interplay here where I'm trying to take sort of one piece of this at a time and understand it. So one thing I've been looking at is environmental influences on what type of business model you might get and how this works. So one aspect is attracting talent to entrepreneurship. So I have a series of papers here where I look at how the policy environment can actually shape the characteristics of those who choose to become entrepreneurs. And so I show through a series of papers both in the Chinese context, the Japanese context, and also in the US, how certain policies, either at the national level or at the university level, can actually encourage more of the best and the brightest to become entrepreneurs. I also look at how the broader environment influences business models that are more based on innovation and technology rather than business models that are more low-tech or small business. So here I've got some work with PhD students, including Daniel Amranios and Jamber Lee, that look at the role of government institutions such as science parks and public funding for university R&D, as well as a study out of the US context that looks at MIT in particular. And then finally here, I've also done a bit of work looking at business models that are based on a new technology versus business models that are more based on relationships. And it turns out the broader institutional environment can play a role in this as we move from more centrally planned and controlled economies to more free market institutions. You see a corresponding shift in business models and startups that are based more on relationships or a government connection to business models that are more based on innovation and new technology and competing in the market. I've also looked at how the environment influences the optimal configuration of the business model in a startup. So this might include influences on the optimal founding team. One of the things I've looked at here is first-time entrepreneurs versus serial entrepreneurs. And so it turns out there are certain circumstances, certain environments where first-time entrepreneurs actually do better. If it's a brand new market or there's been an industry disruption, such as the dot-com boom, then everyone's on a more level playing field, and first-time entrepreneurs have more of an advantage. However, if the entrepreneur is in the same market and the industry, the market's relatively stable, and the technology is relatively stable, then prior experience benefits you more, and serial entrepreneurs have a greater advantage. And I've also been looking at how technology focus versus diverse skills on the founding team can be optimal. And so here, using data from a set of MIT alumni with co-authors at Wharton and MIT, we find that the optimal founding team composition depends on the industry context. So if you're doing something high-tech and you're in an industry where you typically partner with existing incumbents, then it can be better to have a more technically focused founding team, say of all engineers. On the other hand, if you're competing in the product market with incumbents or pursuing more of a low-tech or imitator strategy, then you need a more diverse founding team that has not only engineers, but people who have expertise in sales or marketing or distribution partnerships. And then finally, I look at innovation, and we look at the contexts in which having a business model that includes good new technical ideas is complementary to having individuals on the founding team that also have experience in the organizational arrangements and partnerships that you need to bring innovation into the market. And so we've been looking at these complementary relationships between the different aspects of the business model and entrepreneurship. And then the final stream of work that I have been working on is the influence of stakeholders and social movements on the business model. And so in particular, I've been interested in how stakeholders and social movements can push companies in their business models to direct more attention to innovation in pollution, clean energy, cleaning up the environmental impact. And so I have a stream of papers here showing that it is possible for these stakeholders to put pressure on firms to actually innovate more in the direction of clean energy and create business models that have less of a negative impact on the environment. And so overall, the prior work in entrepreneurship roughly had mainly focused on who becomes an entrepreneur, looking for kind of a set of criteria. And my work has shown that you can't find one single set of criteria, that it depends in part on the broader environment and the institutional environment that shapes which characteristics of people become entrepreneurs. Most of the literature had also been in a very well-developed US or European context, and so I've tried to push that more in the direction of developing markets and emerging economies like China, and looking at whether these types of economies have a different startup process or what the role of that changing institutional context is. And then a lot of the previous work had also been correlational rather than looking for causal factors. And most of my work tends to use natural experiments or policy changes where we can try and get more at what the causal factors are here. And so, again, I've looked at the influence of the broader environment on entrepreneurship and business models. And in conclusion, I found that startups are influenced by the broader industry and policy environment, that institutions can increase high-tech, high-growth forms of startups, and that the business model search is shaped by the environment that surrounds the entrepreneur in important ways that we can influence.